Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, as Donna said, tonight's lecture is on past lives regression or age regression. Now, to understand what we mean by past lives regression or age regression, we first have to look at what reincarnation is. The Latin meaning of reincarnation is coming again into bodies of flesh. Now, before we get started, I'd like to see a show of hands of how many people believe in reincarnation, don't believe in reincarnation, and those of you who are unsure. So how many people believe? Quite a bit. Okay, how many people don't believe? Okay, how many people aren't sure? Okay, good. We have a pretty good number there. Silva has spent a lot of money in time and research in looking into reincarnation and trying to determine if he can scientifically validate it. And he's come up with the conclusion that it cannot be proved with today's scientific techniques. Now, the reason why he says this is because if I regress someone to a past life, and I regress someone and they go through this and they experience it, it's assumed that the life that they're experiencing is one of a prior life, according to the theory. Now, where that goes, what happens is, the reason why you cannot prove that is because I could take another person and regress them to experience the same life. So now the problem comes in, the question that arises is this the past life that the person is experiencing, or just some information about a life that existed whenever, back in the 1800s or 1500s or whatever. So that's why you cannot prove it, okay, with today's current techniques. Jose has come out and said that if new techniques become available and he sees that they're applicable, he'll go back to research and go at it again to prove that it does exist. Okay, it's up to you to decide whether reincarnation is real or not. It's not for me to decide for you or for anyone else. You have to make your own decisions on it. And it's basically a belief system that you would have to either believe in or don't believe in. What I'd like to do is go over what some points are on reincarnation and some points as to what religion has to say about this. Up until about the year 300 AD, the Catholic Church believed in and taught reincarnation with their services. At around 300 AD, there was a pope at the time that said, if reincarnation is real, why is the population of the world at that time increasing? He couldn't understand, because if, according to his interpretation of reincarnation, there should always be a constant population with minor fluctuations. But since the population was increasing so much, he felt that it wasn't valid and that the reincarnation theory didn't hold. So that's why the Catholic Church moved away from believing in reincarnation and they stopped teaching it at that time. Other religions do teach it today. In India, the Hindu religion has strong basis of reincarnation, basically the caste system. If you're good in life and you progress as you're supposed to and you lead a well life, you'll advance in the next life when you come back to different stages until you reach, the final stage. If you're not good, you regress back to prior stages, into lower castes. And that's basically what the religion says. Astrologically speaking, if I take a chart of two individuals in here and we compare them, we can see if those two individuals were ever together in a previous lifetime by comparing different planets or whatever. I'm not really sure on how it's done, I just know that you can do it. Now, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead contains a lengthy description of what the soul experiences after, it passes into the next dimension. And I say passes into the next dimension because if you believe in reincarnation, you have to believe that you don't die, you don't just terminate, you pass into another dimension where you exist on another level, your energy exists. The soul is believed to have two divisions, and these two divisions are called the perishable self, or the personality, and I'll be using personality a lot, and I'll be explaining that in a couple minutes, or the enduring self, called the individual, and the individual would mean a more lasting type of energy. The word personality comes from the Latin word persona. Now, this word originally meant the mask an actor wears when he steps on stage. Now, the mask carried all the makeup of the role, but the actor remained hidden and anonymous behind the mask, so no one knew who he was. All they saw was the outer facade of this person. So that's where we get the word personality. And tonight, when I speak of personalities, I'll be using it in the same context, where your personality is the way all of us see you, but the individual self within you is the way your higher consciousness acts. Okay, it's not necessarily two things, but your personality is the way we view you. When we go back and do other lives regression, either past or future lives, we talk that these are other personalities that you have because you're the same person, when you go back and experience one of these is just another personality trait that you're picking up. You're acting differently than you do today. The word psychology comes from the Greek word psyche, or soul. The Greek word psyche means soul. That's where the word psychology comes today. Psychology is actually the literal meaning of it is actually the study of the soul, not the study of how someone thinks. The psychological field has deviated a little from its actual meaning. Sigmund Freud wrote that if I had to do my life over again, I shall devote myself to the psychical or the soul research rather than the psychoanalysis. Okay, so he, after doing a lot of research in psychology, he believed that there was more to gain in researching the soul and how the soul functions rather than researching how the mind operates. Carl Jung had persistent feelings that he existed before in prior centuries. Both Jung and Freud had said that mankind has always known that it possesses a spirit. How many people here are afraid of death? Okay. It's a common fear. It's a fear of the unknown or whatever. Jung said that death is an integral part of life and just as important as birth. In birth, you're leaving one dimension and you're coming into this dimension. In death, you're passing from this dimension into another dimension. In a study of dying patients, every one of the patients that was studied had a sensation of bliss at the time of passing, and many commented that they didn't know what they were afraid of all these years about the act of what we call dying or passing on into another dimension. Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of our country, at the age of 22 was known to have said on many occasions that he wanted this inscription on his epitaph. I don't believe it's on his epitaph, but this is what he had said that he wanted on his epitaph. The body of B. Franklin printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here food for the worms, but the work shall not be lost, for it will be, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more elegant edition, revised and corrected by the author. Even Ben Franklin, one of our founding fathers, believed in reincarnation. And you'll find that if you go into and you study the field, most scientists and most people who are considered, prevalent thinkers in our society today believe, or they don't put down the possibilities of reincarnation. Now, why, if reincarnation is real and it's valid, why don't we remember our past lives? Okay, that's a common question we might ask. Professor Gage McGregor says that deprivation of memory would be essential for a new and developing, for the development of new growth. Okay, he says that since it is precisely the burden of memory with all its sense of guilt, all the remorse, all the heartaches from the past that impede our genius growth in our later years. So he's saying that the reason why we don't is because if we remembered any guilt that we had from a prior life, it would prevent us from doing things in this life, which makes a lot of sense. If this is true, why would we want to remember a past life? Okay, that's the next question that comes up. The advantages to remembering a past life is to learn from that other life. Okay, there were lessons taught in that life which we might not be aware of in this life, and things that happened which we could use today. And a little later on I'll be getting into more of how this works, but basically it comes in to illustrate how karma acts on your life. Now, karma is called the law of cause and effect. To think of it in bookkeeping terms, you can say it's bookkeeping on a cosmic scale. Okay, for every debit you have a credit. So for every action that you have, there's going to be another action. Like the saying, what goes around comes around. Every action begets an equal reaction. If you're good, you're going to get good to you. If you're bad, you're going to get bad to you. That kind of thing. Well, I'll go into some illustrations on how we found karma to be in effect during our age regression studies. We found a tendency for history to repeat itself. And in our studies, in talking to other people, and in reading about other studies that were done, we found that history repeats itself quite often. And if you get into any psychoanalysis, you'll see that people tend to look at patterns. Well, we found patterns from one lifetime to another. And patterns by people who were in the same kinds of situations. And they didn't get out of those situations because of a couple reasons. Because they didn't want to, or because they didn't like that situation so much that they just kept on turning away from it. How many of you have not dealt with a particular individual or a particular situation just because you're too afraid of it, or you just don't want to deal with it? because you don't want to face it, okay? You're going to have to face that sooner or later, either in this life or in another life. So you might as well get it over now so you don't have to do it later on. So if you put off to tomorrow, you're going to only have to do it tomorrow. That's one of the things that we found. And in going back and looking at previous lives in our age regression studies, we found that you could see what was happening there and you could correlate it to your life today to say, well, gee, it happened then, let me see what happened over there, and let me make some corrections over here. Again, I'll get into more of that a little later on. One of the areas that we found this in is one of the members of our group, we had regressed back to a particular age regression. And in that regression, they had a scar on their hand. Okay, they had gotten a scar, I believe it was from a dog bite. And it happened in a particular situation with some other people that they were also involved in with today. Now, from the scar in this particular age regression, their arm was paralyzed, or, you know, it needed a lot of therapy to get it back into work. And it was paralyzed for a few months within the age regression. And it took about, I think it was 4 or 5 years worth of time before it had gotten better. Now, when we brought the person out of regression, we found that at about the same age, the person had had a similar experience with the same individual, okay, that they were able to identify back in this prior life. They had only this time they had cut themselves with a piece of glass and their arm had been paralyzed again for a couple of months, and it took therapy to get it working again. And they had a scar at the same place that they had seen a scar in the age regression. So these are situations that were brought forward that happened again, the same kind of situation, so that they have to deal with this, and they have to, you know, they have to overcome this situation, or else it's going to keep on happening. Not necessarily every lifetime, but every so often it's going to keep on happening until they make amends with these people. This reminds me of a story in age regression is also taught in the graduate series. I think it's the graduate lecture. And when I was taking the class, one of the illustrations they told us is that there was a particular individual who was a foreman at some company, and he was having problems with these 4 men that were, you know, good friends, and they were always giving him problems. During one of the age regressions in class, he found that he had been with these men in other lifetimes, in I think it was 2 or 3, as a matter of fact. And in the other lifetimes, he'd had severe problems with them, the same way he was having now. And in one lifetime, one of them shot him, I believe, in the head or something like that. After realizing this and making the connection between what was happening in the past and what was happening today, he went back, called each one of them in his office, and, you know, put all the cards on the table with them. They didn't know that he knew that he was with them in other lives, but he made amends with them in this life, basically saying, you know, what's the problem between you and me, that kind of thing. Made amends with them, then quit and went to another job. But he made amends with them first instead of just quitting. If he had just quit, chances are he would have run into them again on some scale. So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about, on how you want to overcome your objection. In another case, it was very interesting. The subject during regression had been removed from his parents at the age of 5. He'd been abducted and he went on a ship or something. And we found that through the regression, the subject had carried a mortar, like from a mortar and pistol, you know, used to grind up spices and tablets or whatnot, carried a mortar and pistol around that that was the only thing he had that he remembered that he had from his mother when he was abducted at 5. After coming out of the regression, the subject realized that at an early age, they had a fascination with the same kind of thing, a mortar and a pistol, and it just always fascinated them. And they had even bought one as a present for their parents, okay, for their mother at that time. So these are the kind of things that repeat themselves. You don't know why you have these fascinations for certain things. And if you look back on your lives, you'll probably remember at certain points in your lives you have a fascination with something that you don't know why, or you have a fear of something that you don't know why. In some cases that I've heard, there were a particular person was run over by a truck in one lifetime. When he came back in the next lifetime, they had a fear of trucks, a fear of large trucks. So this was a seepage, what we call, from one of the previous lives, because they remembered that particular experience. They didn't know why they remembered it, they just remembered that they should be afraid of this, okay, maybe for survival or whatever. In other cases, the subject's interests and actions were similar to the way they are today. In our studies, we found a great tendency for the people in our groups who end up in jail and be radicals and whatnot during the regressions. Similar to the way they are today, only at that time it wasn't accepted that you could talk like this because the church was more powerful, or, you know, the state of the government was more powerful, so they became political enemies. In some cases, what the subject learned through the age regression was how he had been acting all his life, and it was like a learning experience. In one conditioning, one of the members of the group had gone back and been a gladiator in a previous life. And basically he was surviving at that lifetime because he didn't care to go out and kill people in the ring. And he didn't want to go out and be killed himself. So during that particular age regression, the only thing that they found significant during the age regression was the fact that in this lifetime they were able to deal with people better without flying off the handle. They were dealing with people more on a, keep everything calmed down, let's not resort to violence, that kind of thing. So they were turned away from violence. If they had to, they would defend themselves, but they didn't want to. They would only use that as a last resort. So it's interesting how there's lessons to be learned, and there's also a karmic influence on our life, okay? Remember, the soul is here to experience, and, not every bad thing that comes to you comes to harm you. Some, what they say, everything good comes out of something bad, or some expression like that. Well, we found that there was a lot of that, and that for everything that negative happens is a learning experience. And you should look for the learning experience in there and find the significance of why things happen. Sometimes they just happen, you don't understand why, but other times there's a big lesson to be learned. In another case, one of our subjects was a pirate, and they were being chased by another boat, and the other boat happened to ram theirs and sink theirs, and they were stranded in a portion of Africa with an African tribe, and there was a big temple there, and with some stone artifacts inside the temple. During the age regression, the person switched, went to another incarnation. We estimated that it must have been the next incarnation because it was only a span of about 100 years. We went into the next incarnation, and in that lifetime, they had been a printer in England, and they had been reading about this area of Africa that had been opened up and discovered, and it fascinated them so much that they moved to that other area, and it was the same area. They had even found the same rocks that fascinated them in the first regression, in the second regression. And they lived there for the rest of their life, very happily. And it's interesting that in the first regression, we were able to, by the subject describing what happened, figure out where the ship that they were on sunk by some rock formations, the way they described. In the second regression, we asked them to look around and see if there was any areas that drew their attention. It was the same area. They described the rocks the same way, only with a little more age on it. And they said, gee, that area looks like some ships might be sunk out there. So it's interesting how the two coordinate, how the two come back. Have anyone had any feelings of deja vu in their lifetime? Okay, quite a bit. Now, these can be either psychic projections, or they could be past lives experiences. Sometimes if you go to a new city, you say, gee, I know what's going to be around that next corner, or I know that, there's going to be a building over here, or gee, it seems like there should be a building over here, that kind of thing. These may be seepages, or maybe, memories you're bringing back from past lives. I was talking to one individual in here, and they had said they were watching TV, and they had been watching the show about some far-off land. I don't remember where the exact place was, but they had seen buildings, and all of a sudden they had a flashback, and they were remembering a past life that they had where they lived in this area, and they remembered the scenery that they were seeing on TV. So these kind of things happen. If you just pay attention to them, you'll see them happen more and more if you don't suppress the feelings and the emotions that you have from them. Okay, I want to explain some points that we use, or that I'm going to be using tonight. Now, the word personalities I refer to, as I said before, because it's an easy way, and because it's the same thing as an actor putting on a mask. Well, when you go back and you experience these other personalities, it's almost as if you're putting on another mask and you're acting in another way when you experience one of these, because you act differently than you would today. And we call this, and I'll be using this in the meditations that I do later on, another personality. I'll be saying you'll be going to another personality, another lifetime, that kind of thing. So the person will be experiencing another personality, because it will be what you're experiencing. If anyone is doing an age regression, they should have proper training. And by that, I mean that each age regression subject should, first of all, be able to go to level by themselves. They should have proper training so that they can take over their mind at any time. Now, this may be difficult, and that's why we need an orientalogist while we're doing the age regression. The next reason why they need mind training is because we have to obtain deeper levels of mind. Now, if we go over here and we look at our chart, we all know that when we do a meditation, we go to this level down here, this alpha dimension, quite often. This is where we meditate. Now, at this level, we're functioning harmoniously within this lifetime and within this personality. That's one of the expressions we use. It seems that to do past lives regression or any kind of regressions like that, it becomes more effective if we go to a theta or a delta level, somewhere in here. Now, I haven't had an electroencephalogram, but I understand from doing some reading that it's the theta level that we want to go to in order to experience the past lives or the future lives. So what we do is we have the subject go to alpha, and then we do a deepening conditioning exercise where we take it down to what I believe is the theta level, because theta, you would function more harmoniously within other lifetimes. It contains deeper memories. I believe what you're doing is when you go down to this level, you're stimulating memories that you aren't aware you have. So when we bring you down to the theta level, we say to the individual that you are now at a level where you will function harmoniously within other personalities, other dynamic personalities that you may have had at another time. So that I believe what you're doing is you're remembering different experiences you had, just like you would if I asked you to remember how your childhood was. You can think of a personality as a child. You all had a personality as a child, but as you grew, it got refined and developed, and it's a little bit different now that you're an adult. Some people I'm not too sure of, but for most of us it's changed, okay, it's refined. And it's the same kind of thing with past lives regressions. You can see how the personalities develop along the way. What they've learned in one lifetime, they carry over to the next lifetime, and they carry on. In talking to people in this group and in other groups, I've heard of a lot of people who've had bad experiences. They come out of age regression, and they're all shook up, okay? They've had a traumatic experience that they didn't quite expect. I was talking to one person, and they said that they took an age regression class with an individual, and he regressed the whole class at once. And in the middle, and as they were going down into regression, people were screaming, you know, crying and whatnot, because they were experiencing traumatic experiences in these other lifetimes. This is one of the reasons why you should have proper training. Age regression should be on a one-on-one basis. One person should be doing the regression at once. You shouldn't have more than one person doing it. You should never regress alone. Now, what do we mean by this? Do we mean in a crowded room? Or do we mean, as Silva Mind Control teaches you, when we do psychic detection, they say you should always have a counselor or a guide with you, as we've all done in our laboratory. There may be a couple of new students or new people in here that aren't quite sure what to mean. But essentially, when you go down and we're doing a meditative state, we bring in an imaginary counselor. Now, some people believe that this counselor is a spiritual guide, or just a friend, or it could be an old parent, or an old friend, or whatever. But we bring in a guide. Now, the guide is there for a number of reasons. First of all, he's there to protect us. Nothing can happen to us. If we see something's going wrong and we're about to be killed or whatever, we can ask the guide for some help, and the guide will intervene and it will help us. And this has happened a number of times when we've been doing a regression. All of a sudden the patient, the subject is having a traumatic experience. Now I'll go over in a couple minutes how we detect a traumatic experience, but the subject is having a traumatic experience, and what do? I don't know, because I'm sitting on the outside and I'm talking to the subject and they're going through this in their mind, and it's very real to them. It's as if they are experiencing that here. If I take someone back to an age regression and having a sword stabbed to them, it's as if I walked up to anyone here and stuck a sword in you. That's the way it's real. It's very real to the person. And they can have a traumatic experience. I've spoken to a number of people who have come back and they've been shaken up from it for a number of days. So this is why you need the proper training. Now, the guides and the masters is the most important thing we can stress here tonight, to always have a guide or a master with you. Now, the other reasons the guide and the master is there is to answer any questions you might have. We found that while we were doing the regressions, if we brought the person back and they were in, say, BC time, and we said, what date is it? They would come out with, say, 2793 BC. And they wouldn't know what that meant, and quite often they said, gee, this guy's telling me numbers, and I don't know what the numbers mean. Well, we said, well, tell us anyway. We know what the numbers mean. So they told us, and it was completely, it was just an abstract number to them. They didn't know what it meant. But they were able to relay this, get this information from the guide or the master. Okay, the guide and the master is also there to lead you to this other personality. Now, we found, using our techniques, that the subject was able to go to any particular personality that they wanted to. For instance, if you wanted to go back and see if you had you had been together in a previous life with someone you know, you could tell your guide, say, well, I want to go back to a lifetime where I knew my mother or my father previously to this. So the guide would take you back, and quite often you would end up in another personality where you knew this individual. But as far as I know, I haven't read or heard about any other techniques that do stress the fact that a counselor and a guide is there with you. It's very easy because now you have two people controlling. You have the person on the outside talking you through this, and you have a guide in there bringing you in a certain direction. And the guide is always right. The guide always knows where to go and what to do. Some problems that we found that are pretty systematic that occur is that anything can happen. Anything at all can happen when we do an age regression. A couple of times we brought people down to do an age regression, and as we're going to the past lives, they went off to a learning experience with their counselors. Their guide took them somewhere else and taught them something or relayed some information to them, and it wasn't a past life at all. It was just happened to be a learning experience that they had to do at that time, and it was convenient for them to do it. So this happens at times. Not everything you experience will be an age regression, and you'll know it at that time. You'll know that you're just going to, say, a laboratory, or just going to another scene where something like this is happening. Okay, another thing we found is that quite often the subject was aware that death is near or that death was inevitable. Okay, in the case with the gladiator's standing there and he's in a fight and he's saying, gee, I'm not doing too good in this fight and I'm losing and whatnot. And so that's giving us pretty clear signs that this guy's about to pass on to another dimension within this lifetime. Now, at that point, what you say to the person, and you condition this in prior, because before we did any age regressions, we did a number of conditioning cycles that you only really have to do once, but every now and then you reinforce it. In the case when you have a pretty good idea that you know this guy's going to go into battle and he's going to, for instance, in the case of a gladiator, you know pretty well at one of these battles the guy's going to go in and he's going to get knocked off. So what you condition to the person, you just say, you may step away from this experience at any time and view it as a movie. So what happened in our case is when the subject was aware that this was going to happen, they stepped away. Now, even though they're experiencing this lifetime as if it's real, they still, for some reason, have the ability, when things get a little out of hand, to step away, okay, because they are still under control of what's going on. Now, they're not aware of their current personality, but they are under control on what the situation is, as long as you condition that in. Now, if you don't condition that in, the person may go through that and wake up and they're all shaken up and they've actually gone through a death experience. And an experience like that will carry on with the person from a couple of days to a couple of months, if done incorrectly. Now, if you just instruct the person that they will always be safe and the guides will always protect them, and they can step away at any time, they'll just step away, view it. They may be a little emotional, upset about it, but they won't have a traumatic experience. So that's another point you want to be aware of. Before the person comes back to their present personality, what we always do is we give them a minute and we tell them, view this life, see it from start to finish, and notice any significant points that happen or that you might want to tell us about. And they'll review the life and bring out any significant points and whatnot. Now, the next thing we say is that I would like you to come back, and we mention the person's name and the date, whatever, just to orientate them to the current personality. Then we say, I'd like you to leave behind any negative emotions and negative feelings. Now, this is very important because even though the person is experiencing a past life regression, if you don't condition in that they're going to leave negative thoughts and negative emotions back with that other personality, they'll bring it forward with this one, and they will actually get, they will actually keep it with them for a few days. We noticed that it lasted, I don't know, 3 to 4 days. Some of us kept it with us. Now, by keeping it with it, what does that mean? Well, if the person went back and they, for instance, were beaten up physically at one time in their life and they were very cold, for the next several days they had chills. Or if the person had a traumatic experience, if they brought it back, they would remember this for a couple days. Or if the person had a very nice experience, they would remember the very nice experience for a few days. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to leave the negative emotions and the negative attachments back there with the other personality. What you want to bring is the positive experiences, the positive emotions, and any lessons that might have been learned back with you. We also found, in some cases, the subject would get to the previous personality or prior personality, like going, anyone heard the expression by way of Robin Hood's barn? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, what we mean by this is going back and doing the age regression. Person in one case ended up in a crystal cave, a very beautiful crystal cave. Now, they ended up there, and this wasn't a previous life, this was just on the journey getting to the prior personality. So in going on, you can tell that in some cases that the person is not at a prior life because there's certain things that they say and the way they act. But anyway, we realized that the person wasn't at another personality. So we said, well, anyone else around there? And I think there was one other guy there was someone that walked in and said, come with me. They brought him to another room, put him in this room, shut the door. Now, the orientalogist says, well, what's in this room? They said, oh, there's a videotape recorder over there. I said, well, go turn the videotape recorder on. So turn it on, and they said, well, what do you see? Well, it's a movie about a land, about another planet, another city. So they said, well, would you like to go to that city? So I said, yeah, so that count of 3, you'll be in that city. 1, 2, 3. You're now in that city. And now the person's age regression started. They were in a prior personality. And then they walked through and they went and experienced that personality. So sometimes you have to be aware of little things like that. The first couple of times that the people in our research group experienced an age regression or experienced a prior personality, they were aware of both personalities at the same time. And I believe that's because they weren't deep enough. Okay, they still had some hesitation with experiencing this. And that's good as far as I'm concerned because you have more control at that time. Because when you first start this, you want more control because if anything traumatic happens, you want to be able to step away consciously. And you don't want to go through it and have no control over it. You don't want to experience any traumatic experiences again. So the first couple of times they were doing an age regression, they were aware of both personalities. It was like they were flipping back and forth. The next few times they did it, as they got more experience, they were less aware of this personality and they were more aware of the other personality. And we even got to a point where people started picking up accents and talking as if they were the other person. There's some good southern accents in there and whatnot. You could tell that the person was actually in another land. We also found that sometimes the subject had a problem with words. They weren't able to find the right word because, again, we're speaking in English. And although they spoke in English, they weren't always aware of how to describe something. And what we attribute this to is that if we regress the person back and they were in, for instance, Egypt, and they were used to talking Egyptian, now they're talking English. Okay, and they're not aware they're talking English, but they don't know really how to describe something. So we started putting in a translation clause, and it simply said that you will be able to describe anything you see or anything you feel very easy. It'll be easily, words will easily come to you. We found that once this happened, once we started adding this to the conditionings, the subject was able to relay information easier, okay, and start, describing what they were going through, and describing the buildings, and describing material and whatnot, in words that we understood. Sometimes they came out with words that we didn't really understand, like names of cities and things like that. We also seem to find that most of the time, the person experienced negative or traumatic experiences while doing an age regression. I'd say about 50% of the time. Now, in doing other research besides ours, in researching other experiments that were done, the reason for this is that it's quite often negative feelings or the negative situations that's happened in a personality that come forward into this personality that you have to learn through. It's quite often, how many learning experiences do you have that are always just nice and rosy? Not too many. Usually it's some heartache that you go through. Say you have a business and the business isn't going too well and it's a traumatic experience for you and you overcome that and you're now stronger in business. We found the same kind of things happen. So that the negative or traumatic experiences that you've had in the past are the ones that you may still have to learn in the current incarnation. So we found that quite often the person would go back to one of these others and they would have somewhat negative experiences. Other times they'd have very positive experiences, or a combination of the two. Physically speaking now, there's a number of things you may feel or you may experience while you're doing an age regression. One of the things, as an orientalogist, you would be looking for is that as you bring the person from alpha to theta, you'll notice a number of things happen. At first, I always noticed that the person's breathing increased. Okay, they started to breathe much faster. As you go to alpha, you breathe slower. As we found out from the trip from alpha to theta, the person would start breathing a little faster, and then all of a sudden they would just relax, and they take very deep, slow breaths, and then intermingle with very shallow, slow breaths. Another thing that happened is you get a decrease in your body temperature. So if you're in a warm room, even if you're in a warm room, you may want to put a blanket on your subject while you're doing the age conditioning. Okay? The reason for this is you're going to theta, and that's a level you're used to sleeping at. Your body circulation is slowed down, your body function is slowed down. You're not aware of your body anymore, okay? So you have less, your body temperature does go down. Another thing that quite often happens is the subject gets a feeling that their body is like a balloon, or that their body is twice the size that it normally is. And again, that's because they're functioning at a theta level. Okay, they have different sensations about their body. Another thing that happens is that your body feels like it's lead, like it weighs, you know, a lot, very, very much, a couple of thousand pounds or whatever. Again, this is because you're at theta. You're becoming aware of your body's changes. And then when we brought them out, it was almost as if they came out of a very deep sleep. The subjects also had a tendency to relay only information that they were asked. They're at level and they're experiencing another personality, but they didn't feel any reason to relay information to you freely. So if you didn't ask questions, quite often they didn't relay the information. Now, sometimes if you asked a question, and I'll go over in 2 minutes how we got this information. If we asked a question about the situation that they were involved in, they would start to look around and they would focus on that and become aware of other things that they weren't consciously aware of in that situation. For instance, if in the situation with the mortar and the pistol, the Orientologist asked the subject, look into your pocket, what do you have in there? And the person looks into a pocket and pulls out, he says, I don't know, I have this little piece of glass. It looks like, you know, I don't know, it's a round piece of glass, it's thicker on the bottom and it's thin on the top. This is what the psychic had visualized that the person had in their pocket at this time. I'll get into a moment just what the psychic is. We found that the subjects also had a tendency to think that the questions being asked by the Orientologist were dumb questions. Okay? Subject sitting on a hill, he's got a staff in his hand, there's a bunch of sheep around, and the Orientologist goes, where are you? I'm in a meadow. What are you doing? I'm sitting here with a bunch of sheep. What do you think I'm doing? It's obvious to the person who's experienced the personality that, you know, it's just a dumb question, but to the person on the outside, a lot of times you don't know what the person's going through. You're just aware of different sensations. Okay. When we were doing our regressions, we found it necessary to have 3 parties: the subject, the Orientologist, and the psychic. Now, the role of the Orientologist is one to keep talking, okay? The Orientologist is the person that stands there and brings the person to the other personality, almost as if a hypnotic trance. They're in a deep trance state. Brings a person to another personality, talks them through it, asks them questions. We like to keep one person doing this. We don't like to bring other people in because it gets confusing for the person listening. They don't know what question to answer first. Now, that's the role of the Orientologist. Much the way it is if you do case working. We've all taken Silva on the 4th day where we do cases, and we do, you know, you bring the person down the level, you say, put Mr. Jones on your screen, and what do you see? Well, it's the same type of thing. You want to keep the person going to questions. Where are you? What are you doing? How old are you? Can you describe yourself? What are you wearing? What's the date? You know, do you have any parents? Do you have any close friends in the neighborhood? That kind of stuff. Now, the role of the subject is the one everyone wants to be. They want to be lying there experiencing the regression. That's the easy part. All you have to do is lie there and listen, or sit down, listen to what the person's saying, and go through it, and just relay information back. Now, the psychic is an interesting position to be in. The psychic is the person that should be looking for trauma and viewing the area that the subject is going through and relaying this information to the Orientologist. Now, the way this is done is that we all know that in silver mind control, if you go to your laboratory, and for those of you who don't know what laboratory is, it's just a deep state of mind where we're in a place that's comfortable to us, where we have points of reference where we can function. Excuse me. So you're in a laboratory. If I go down to level, I can go to your laboratory too and see what it looks like, or I can go visit you there, or whatever. And this has been done. So Jose Silva has done this on many occasions, especially with children. When they do the children's classes, and they bring the children down at the laboratories, quite often they find that each of the kids in the class know what everyone else's laboratory looks like. Because they go and they just, want to visit their friends while they're down there. They don't want to do the exercises or whatever. So they investigate, which is very healthy. Go and investigate the other people's in the class's laboratory, see what they're like. So the psychic can do this in the same way. And we had some very good psychic development during our regression studies too. You tend to pick up just almost out of the clear blue sky, what's going on during the regression. So you want to have one person watching this, watching for, say, traumatic experiences. Is the subject in a bad position? Do you know what's going on with the subject? And quite often you can pick that up. So if you see something like that happening, and this is that level, you write it down on a piece of paper, give it to the orientologist, and he tells them what to do. Or, as I said before, the psychic goes down, and he's looking around, and they say, gee, the person has a beard, a mustache, you know, sitting in a room full of other people, or has something in their pocket. And a lot of times they write down exactly what's going on and exactly what the person was experiencing and what they were wearing and different things like that. The orientologist would then say, look in your pocket, what's in there? And then the person would come back and they'd say exactly what the psychic had seen there. But the subject wasn't aware of that before we asked the question. So quite often it's very good to have the psychic there going through and so almost monitoring what the subject is doing. Okay, that's another thing that I haven't seen in any of the literature on being done. And it's another checkpoint that you want to do. Because you don't want to be alone when you're doing your regression. You want to have people in there watching you, knowing what's going on. Because if all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you're being attacked, how are you going to relay that information? How am I on the outside going to know that something's going wrong? Unless I ask you. Because sometimes I didn't like to let it go that long, but occasionally we had periods of almost a minute or a minute and a half where there weren't any verbal communication. And the person's just sort of looking around and viewing the situation. So you get a little nervous. You say, well, what's really going on here? Is the person all of a sudden experiencing something that we don't know about, and we should? So that you want to be able to monitor what they're doing. Also, we found that if the subject was reading something, the psychic would know that there was more there that the subject didn't read. So we'd force the subject to go finish reading. Well, what else is there? Is there another sentence? Oh, yeah, there is another sentence. Let me finish reading it. So rather than coming back with only one sentence, they came back with 2 or 3 sentences out of whatever they were reading. So those are the 3 roles, and that's the way we'll be doing it here tonight also. Now, the method that we developed for the regression was to allow the most amount of flexibility for the subject, so that the subject could go in any direction they wanted to. And we ended up in some pretty strange places. Places that the orientologist wasn't really aware of where they were until 3/4 of the way into the regression. You have to sort of get your bearings on what was going on. Now, first thing you want to do is always record your regressions so that you can listen to them later on when you come back, or you want to say, gee, what did I say over there? Well, quite often, a week later or 2 weeks later, you might say, gee, now I know why I had that thing in my pocket, or I had that mortar from the mortar and pistol. I remember that when I was a kid, I had a fascination for it. Or I remember something else. Or, oh yeah, I remember that I had a scar in the back of my leg. When I was 15 years old, I got a scar in the back of my leg. And in 2 regressions I had gotten a scar in the back of my leg, or I've gotten stabbed in the back of my leg. So it was seepages coming through. And we found that quite often, that if you analyze the situation, what was going on, not necessarily that night, but maybe a couple of days later, you realize the connections between the 2. So it's good to keep a record of it, and it's fun to listen to. Listen to some of the things that you experience. Now, what we did is we have the subject go to level, and then once they're at level, they let us know, and then we take them from alpha to theta. Once they're at the theta level, we introduce guides and masters to them. And a guide and master is anyone. We just say, visualize yourself on a nice passive scene. Some people are on mountains skiing, other people are on the beach. Okay? So your guide comes in. Now, after the first couple of times, we let the subject decide how the guide was going to take them. Sometimes the guide just floated off into the, a black void and ended up at another personality. Other times the guide brought the person to a house, the subject walked into the house and went into a particular room, and that was the personality they experienced. Other times, we found it very good to say, you're now there with your guide, and there's 3 roads, there's 3 paths you can take that are in front of you. One that goes off to the right, one that goes off to the left, and one that goes straight ahead. Choose any path you like. Or if you can say the left is the future, the middle is the present, and the right is the past. You can say almost anything you want. You'll find that if you start doing these, you'll almost sense it, that as you started, what you should do. But that's a very easy way to do it. So you have 3 paths in front of you. Choose a path that you want to take. You know what the personalities are. Pick the one that's most interesting to you. There may be one that stands out to you. This is the person at that level you're saying this to. Maybe one that stands out to you more than another one. Okay, I'm going to count from 10 to 1. At the count of 1, you will be this other personality, dynamic and alive. Please take your counselor's hand or your guide's hand, and they will lead you to this other personality. And then you count from 10 to 1, and you lead them to this other personality. Now, at the time that we're talking about all this, we introduce protective statements. We say that their guide is there to answer any questions, to protect them, and to lead them to this other personality. Okay? But you want to stress that the guide is there to protect you. You also say to the person that they may step away from this experience at any time they wish and view it from the outside as if they were watching a movie. This is very important, again, to get back to what we were saying before about traumatic experiences. This isn't they get nervous about that, it's just something to be aware of. It's almost as if, you know, if you're driving a car, you want to know how to steer it. You don't just want to step on the gas. Now, we also gave them translation statements, as I mentioned before. It would be very easy for you to describe what you're experiencing and what you see at any time during this regression. Okay, that's all you really need to say. I've heard of other people who have had people start talking in foreign languages. We didn't get any foreign languages. The best we did was accents. Would have been interesting to get some, or maybe later. So even if someone starts talking in a foreign language, say, at the count of 3, you will speak in English, very clearly in coherent English. 1, 2, 3. And the person starts speaking in English. Okay, before you allow the person to start the age regression, you say, on my command, you will come back to, and today is February 21st, 1986, to the personality of, and whatever the person's name is. It's very important to say that because you want to orientate them to where they're from. When they go someplace, you want to say, okay, you will now come back to February 21st, 1986, to the personality of whatever the person's name is. And we found that if you mention the person's name, it sort of pulled them back faster. They could become orientated to it a lot faster than if you said, okay, whenever you're ready, come on out. You know, you were able to pull them back a lot faster. And I like to say it a couple of times because I noticed for myself anyway, that if you mentioned the name, it was easier to come back. And you could come back a lot faster than if you just said, okay, anytime you're ready, open your eyes. Okay, then we would regress the person to another personality, allow them to experience it by asking questions. And this is where the imagination comes in, because you have to think of a number of different kinds of questions to ask. What are you doing? Are there any people around? What do they look like? Are you friendly with any of them? Which one are you most friendly with? Do you have any parents? Are you married? Do you have any kids? How tall are you? What sex are you? You can change sex when you go back to a personality. You're a female now, you may be a male now. A male in the prior personality. You're a male now, you may go back to a female life. Okay? So you can do all these things. Yes?
Different lives, they have a pattern, like you live in a certain area of the world, or certain years, or does it study patterns, or it goes all over?
We found it went all over. It went back from, we got some ones that went back pretty far to 3,000 or 4,000 BC. We got some ones that only went back to 1800s.
A certain area in the world?
Now, all over. We found some cases they were in Africa, some cases they were in Egypt, some cases they were in India, some cases they were in the United States. Anywhere. You know, wherever there's people you can go back to. So some people may go back to the same area, but you can go back to any area. At one time or another, you probably lived almost any place. Okay? You may even go to another planet.
But you know, you're going to have a question.
Yeah, after we get done, we'll have questions. Okay. Now, after we go through, we've asked them a lot of questions. We give them a time to view the life. Say, okay, now I'm going to give you a moment to view this personality and to pick out any points of interest that you might wish to tell us about. You review it, remember everything about this life, and when you're ready, let me know. Give the person 30 seconds, a minute or so. While the person's at level experiencing this regression, it seems like they're only there for 5 minutes. And we had regressions that lasted anywhere from a half an hour to an hour and a half. And the person came out and said, yeah, it felt like 5 minutes. So to you, to the orientologist on the outside, it's a very long time. To the person experiencing it, it's only a couple minutes worth of that life. They don't really see it as a long time. And the longer ones seem just as short as the shorter one. After they've viewed this life, and you give them a minute or so to do that, you tell them that they will leave any negative thoughts or any negative emotions or any negative feelings they've had with this lifetime behind with that life. And that's it. And then you tell them to come back, as we mentioned before. You also want to thank them for sharing this life with you. Okay, just sort of like you thank your counselors as you say your goodbye prayer. It's the same kind of thing. Now, okay, then you ask them to come back to the current incarnation. And that's basically what we did. Any questions at this point? Yes?
When you have them view a life, do they view just that certain point in time that they've gone to this personality, or do they view their entire life from childhood to death?
It depends. It depends on the person. At that point, usually the person is starting to step away from the life so they can view at any point. Sometimes they just view the immediate situation they're in. Other times they view it from the beginning to the end. Because as they're viewing the life, they might say, gee, I went back, like in the case with the person being in Africa, they said, gee, I went back to England, but then I went back to Africa. So they were covering a number of periods of years, almost like they were looking, you know, they were 90 or so looking back on their lives, so remembering their childhood, that kind of thing. So they were able to do both, either view the situation they were in or view everything as a whole. Okay, any other questions?
Richard, what is your knowledge and your opinion as to what the soul is? Is it the spirit or the mind?
I believe it's the spirit, because the mind is only a physical manifestation of this body. Okay, but that's a whole theological question. We weren't out to determine any answers like that. We were just out to determine what the experience was. Okay, even as far as if reincarnation exists or not, we're not here tonight to debate that, which you can get into a very lengthy discussion with valid points on both sides. But we were just out to experience it. And if it's reincarnation or not, we don't know. What we believe is another thing. Okay, the other question?
Richard, based on your experience, how long it takes from one life to the next one?
It was hard to tell because we got very few that were consecutive. The closest we got was a span of 100 years. But it was hard to tell, yes.
When did the guy get run over? What, 100 years ago?
No, that was in a case I was reading about. No, it was a rather frequent incarnation because in the study what had happened is the person was able to identify that they had only died within 25 years of when they were actually doing the regression, so that they had passed away for some reason. Their spirit or whatever decided that they didn't finish what they were supposed to do, and they immediately went back and incarnated again.
Richard, where was the psychic at what level?
Psychic was functioning at alpha and theta, going through the experiences with the person. The psychic would open their eyes, talk to us, and then go back to level. Or just having to close their eyes for a second or so, we'll just pick up something.
How do you recognize somebody in past life before they might be?
Okay, what you say is anyone in this lifetime in your current incarnation as whatever your name is? And the person might say, look around. They say, oh yeah, the person who's my mother is my mother here today. Or the way you can start telling a lot of times, you say, who are you close to in this lifetime? If the person says no one, chances are that they're not going to know anyone in their current incarnation. We found that if we said, who are you close to in this lifetime? They said, well, I'm very close to my brother. And then later on we said, are there any people in this personality that you know in your current personality as, and you mentioned the person's name, and quite often they'll bring out the person that they said they were close to as someone that they know in this personality, in this lifetime.
How long did you work with this particular group, and how many people were in that group?
There were 4 people in the group, and we were working since December, and we did an average of, I guess, 4 a night. I guess we did about, would you say, 30, 40 regressions, I guess? Probably close to 50.
And something I'm curious about is when you regress with your friends regress totally different personalities.
Right.
It sounded to me like was it like a goal that person should forget about their present personality at all?
I mean, while they were experiencing it?
Right.
Well, the less you remember about your current incarnation, the deeper you are and the more real the experience is.
Because what I'd like to share is that when I've done regressions, that I've always a sense of what you said, the spirit being the same person throughout, and that being in touch with that, gave me the strength that I could always attach myself.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a matter of how much you're willing to, you know, get into the experience, basically. I don't see anything wrong with that, because I think it's good that you have some control over it. Because if anything traumatic happens, you want to be able to step away.
So when you say get into the experience,
well, become that personality.
Emotionally, or because you can view, as you say, as though a movie, or even being that person,
right.
and at the same time be like a movie, you can view the whole personality, the whole lifetime, and still be in touch with that you are not there then.
Yeah, either way is fine.
You'll get all the learning experience.
Yeah. As long as you retain, as long as you get information, that's the main point. You know, it's whatever you feel comfortable with. However, you know, however deep you want it to go, however, you know, I guess a lot of it has to be how much you trust the person who's being the orientalogist. If you don't trust the person a lot, or you don't trust the group you're with, you're better off to stay on the outside so you have control over it. I've spoken to a number of people, and they've said that when they were doing regressions, the person doing the orientalogist, they didn't feel was experienced enough, and they started bringing themselves, they started giving themselves protective statements and different statements so that they were able to get through good. So, you know, it's whatever you feel comfortable with.
Is there any particular thing that determines which personality is?
Yeah, sometimes at random, sometimes you can tell them, I'd like to go to one where I was together with someone else, or whatever. Usually, for the most part, it was random. Okay, the guide or the counselor decided where you were going to go. You just said, take me to wherever. In other cases, we said, like we had people that were fascinated with the Civil War. So we said, okay, ask your guide to take you to a lifetime where you lived in the Civil War. And they were brought back to a particular time that they lived in that period. So you can do it either way. Either you just go off and see where you end up, or you can tell your guide, I'd like to go back to see if I was with my husband, say, or my wife in a particular personality. So, did anyone over here have a question? Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. We tended to find that the person acted similarly, with some exceptions, but basically they acted the way they act today. And I would say about probably 50% of the regressions. The other 50%, in some cases, they did act different. Okay, but in most cases, they had similar themes, like, you know, they were radicals. They talked about radical subjects, and they ended up, you know, as we said, a lot of them ended up in jail, or ended up as political prisoners, or ended up as, huh? Those are radicals. I bet if we did it in here, we'd have a bunch of them, too. But it's good. You know, you see the same kind of themes, or you see the same kind of themes in similar regressions. We had one regression where, in the case where we had the person who cut their wrist, the first regression they went into, and this can happen too, let me explain this. First regression they went into, they were a very wealthy person in England, and they were helping out. There was a plague going on in the area, and they were trying to coordinate everyone to, you know, bring in money and bring in help for everyone that was experiencing the plague, and the plague was mostly being experienced by the poor people in the area. So they were trying to coordinate all these people together and have everyone overcome it, rather than just say, well, you're not worth anything, so I'm not going to help you. So they were coordinating everything. About halfway through the conditioning, we said, okay, now we're going to go to another period that's significant in your life. I'm going to count some numbers. Let me know when you're ready to go. We counted 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The person says, okay, I'm ready. I said, where are you? What year is it? Oh, it's the year 10. So right away, you know, the person said they were in the year, I think it was 1563 or something like that. And they said, I'm in the year 10. The chances are they didn't live to be 100, and they didn't go back, and they weren't born in the year 10, you know, speaking on the scale. So we figured that they had to have jumped. How old are you now? And so now they were 5 years old rather than being 25 years old. So they switched in the middle. We're back to another incarnation where they were the victim of a plague, okay? And they were in a plague camp, and they were escaping. So there was definite connection between the two regressions. Okay, this personality on one side knew what it was like at some level, what it was like to be the victim. It was coordinating all the efforts, okay? So there was some connection there. And we found a lot of this went on. So you could see connections between personalities, between lifetimes and regressions. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Can anybody be regressed
If you don't want to, you're not going to be regressed. Just like if you don't want to be hypnotized, you're not going to be hypnotized. Yeah, you can, sure. It may take you a little while to get used to the feeling of being at level, at being at these deep levels. But you will experience something. You will experience an awareness. Just like if you do case studies, in the fourth day of mind control, you do a casework, and we say John Doe is going to be on your mental screen. Sometimes you see him vividly, sometimes you just see a pink fog there with two little eyes. It's the same kind of thing. But you will experience something.
Did you ever find or read about that consciousness existing in two different people at the same time, in the same period of time?
I've heard about that, but only in reading. I've never experienced that. You have a question?
Yeah, silvamethod that somebody in a regression can experience the sequence of life that they have lived.
Yeah, we had that experience when the person was in one life and then in the middle they went to another life.
And then my question is to find out, to go back and find out how many lives they have lived.
Well, I would say that you've had thousands of lives, so I don't think you're going to do them all in one night. Okay? Well, most people, when they think it, when I first thought of age regressions, I thought, 2, 3, maybe 4. But, if you look at cosmic scale and you say that the universe has always been around and is always going to be around on some dimension, it means that the spirit has to always have been around and is always going to be around. So that thousands of lifetimes, either in this dimension, other dimensions, other planets. We had a couple where we weren't quite sure where the person was. Were they on this planet? Were they on another planet? They weren't really able to tell us because it was in such a different culture and a civilization. It could have been here, could have been, 20,000 years ago on this planet, or it could have been another planet. They weren't really sure. Yes?
Did people ever visit into the future incarnations?
That's hard to tell because, as I said before, they were back to other personalities, and they were in, to us, strange places. So is that the future of the past, or is it existing all simultaneously? It's hard to tell. Okay.
On your time question to the guys.
Sometimes the time questions didn't work. Okay, or we got answers that we really weren't sure what they meant. Sometimes they said, my guide doesn't tell me any time, or they would come out and say, well, time doesn't mean anything. They were on other planes, and, that's a stupid question. What are you asking me that for? It doesn't mean anything. It's just an illusion, that kind of thing. And we got answers like that. Or you'd ask a question, and they'd say, that's a totally irrelevant question, and that's it, they didn't answer it.
Did anyone ever experience being a walk-in?
A what?
A walk-in.
What do you mean a walk-in?
Ruth Montgomery speaks of walking as someone who has chosen, doesn't incarnate through birth, but passes that birth process and say someone is in a near death or is deciding to leave this life and another spirit takes over the life. That's what passes through. They transfer. And another person takes up the body, the personality, the whole memory.
In other words, you would have two souls sharing one body at different points.
Yeah, we didn't experience any of that, but then we weren't looking for something like that. So if we did experience something like that, we weren't aware of it. Because again, if they had all the memories, they were just answering questions we asked them. But it's interesting. I've never heard of that before. So a question over here?
How does that account then for the increase in the population?
Okay, there really isn't an increase in the population. What there is an increase in the lifespan. Okay, since the lifespan has gone from, say, 40 years to 70 years, that means that there's twice as many people around now because we're living twice as long. There's really not an increase in the population, and if you look at population statistics, the population is actually decreasing in the world today. There are less population increasing in third world nations. Since the only increase in population is due to age, it's not due to birth. Okay, it's only due to the fact that we're living longer. It's not that there's any more births.
There's more people waiting in the wings.
Well, not really, because if you look at population statistics, if there's been a period of high population, it levels off and then it actually decreases for a period. In 300 AD, when the Catholic Church was getting nervous about the population increase, thereafter, during the Middle Ages, the population was at this all-time low of recorded history. So it increased, a lot of people were incarnated then, and then decreased off. And then a lot of people came back later on, and it's probably going to decrease off again in the next, 200 years or so. Well, it's interesting, after wars, what happens is, they noticed that if a large portion of the male population was killed off, there's a larger portion of the male population born again, rather than an equal amount. Usually it's more women than males, but after wars it's always more males than women. You have a question?
That would account then because the males are.
Yeah, whether it's nature balancing or what, I don't know.
Yeah.
Someone had a question over here? Okay. Okay, we're going to break for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do the meditations. Okay? Thank you.
Half an hour?
Excellent.
Another personality, either a prior or future life, whatever she wants to go to. At that time, I'd like everyone to remain quiet. If you have any questions that you want to ask me, write it down on a piece of paper and hand it to me. Okay? If you have any questions that maybe you want me to ask the subject or something, because I don't want too much noise in the background about people yelling things out or raising their hand or anything. So the actual regression we do with the age regression will probably be anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes. It's hard to tell. But we try to keep it down to about 20 minutes to a half an hour, but we'll see how it goes. Then after Donna comes out of the regression, we'll then have an open discussion about it, if any questions you want to ask. Okay?